Bruchim Habaim to our learning chevra this evening. I'm Andrea Cohen-Keiner up here in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I'm the Frankliner Rebbe in the Rebbe of Franklin County. And the material I want to share with you tonight is called the B'nai HaNevi'im, the sons of the prophets. Think about that. Raise your hand if you knew that the Jewish tradition has a thing called prophecy school. Raise your hand. See what I mean? And even some of us that are very highly trained have not heard about this situation, and yet, strangely enough, there it is right in all the texts. There you go. And that's the thing that we'll be uncovering tonight, and it's a fascinating subject to be sure. Are you with me? Are you with me so far? Very good. Okay, hi Devorah, brucha haba. So we'll do that, and I guess we'll just start in. So if you look up B'nai HaNevi'im in the concordance, if you look in the Hebrew or in the English, it would be like the sons of the prophets. Then you would come up with about 22 citations, and we're going to get an overview of those citations and what's sort of included in them. And it ranges from the period of, like, you would call it, judges, like the early prophecy period, Samuel primarily. And then, of course, going all the way through Ezra and Nehemiah, where you have the B'nai HaNevi'im as sort of the social class. We'll see some of those citations. But then, of course, zooming out, we have all these different books of the prophets, like the minor ones and the major ones. And so in those situations, we have, I'm Ezekiel and I'm prophesying in this time. And he doesn't tell you how he was trained. And so there's this whole other sort of, let's call it the prophetic tradition that's coming through in a more direct way. But what we're going to look at tonight is that some of the textual mentions, the very brief mentions of the prophecy school are very, very interesting. And then on top of that, there's this one period in like 1st and 2nd Kings where the curtain gets pulled back, and we know who is the dean of the prophecy school and who is the next guy in line. And that's all in Kings 1 and 2. And we're going to blow up one of those stories and maybe do an overview of the others. It's not all the way for sure how much time we'll have for this, but my goal is to do the overview and then to blow up at least one of them and then to do some context around that. And then Yirtzeh Hashem, maybe we'll bring it down to the modern time a little bit, and I'll say a little word from Reb Kalanimas. So we'll maybe at 8:25, I'll just clue myself to bring in Reb Kalanimas, a very sweet and important Rebbe for me. I always like to share him. And Yella, all the other people, welcome, Bruchim Habaim. And here we go. We're going to be on screen share for now. And this is being recorded. And you can also email me if you want this handout. I'd be happy to email it to you guys. And I'll say that at the end. Maybe I'll say it right now. That would be rabbi@templeisraelgreenfield.org. I'm sorry if there's a simpler way to do it. I don't know it. But I'd be happy to share this working document with you. And so what I brought up for you here is called Biblical References to the B'nai HaNevi'im. And the first two are very, very interesting, the earliest ones that we have here, if we just read them a little.
I'm not seeing a shared document. Are others?
Okay, let me make sure I'm doing that correctly. Thank you for... Okay, share, here we go. Here we go. Thank you for calling that. How's that now?
It's good.
There you go. So this is the overview part, and we'll just zoom in a little bit to the first two mentions are very interesting to us, that we'll see that The group of prophets is coming down from the high place with harps and tambourine and flute and lyre, and they'll be prophesying. And look at that, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily, and you shall prophesy with them and be changed into another man. And so how I've labeled this here is contagious, ecstatic music and dance. So that if you come near the prophets, you can get hooked up with them in the spirit. So that's kind of interesting. That's happened to me a few times at Kala, at Jewish renewal gatherings. So I think in a way we know something about this, that ecstatic practice can draw others in, even if they're not prepared, even if they're not part of the prophecy school. Look at King James, and I'm just going to mostly call your attention here in the overview to just the part that's in italics in a way. And I'm going to show you that as we proceed through the middle books of Tanakh, that we see that Elijah the Tishbite, for example, has mastery over the elements in a certain way. And he collaborates with animals. And he's able to bring a continual food source from a limited origin. And Elijah knows how to raise the dead, which is, not everyone can do that. So here he's controlling the rain. And here he's aligning with women, which is another theme that happens in the parts where we open it up a little more. And here he's raising the dead. Isn't that interesting? Let's just say that this is 600 and 700 years before Jesus. Does that remind us of Jesus, right? Let's see. Okay. So this is another interesting one where I included quite a bit of it. Hope y'all can hear me. This is a bit of a long story. We're not going to read it tonight, but it's during the time when the prophet Elijah, who's the dean of the prophecy school at this time, he is told by the Lord to hook up with Ahab, the king that he's been punishing by causing a drought. And so Ahab, this negative king, and Obadiah, his master of the house, they're out looking together for water sources. And here Elijah presents himself, and it's turned out that this major domo, this helper of the evil king here, bumps into Elijah. And what he says to the prophet Elijah here is, I don't know if the Spirit of the Lord may carry you away when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. And yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. He's an honest man. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I saved them. And if I go and I tell the king that Elijah is here and he comes here and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. So we learn quite a bit from this about Obadiah's former actions. And then that it appears that Elijah is capable of just disappearing. And I would say that he's kind of afraid of the prophet, right? So, sorry? Sorry, I'm not hearing that comment. Is that Sharon? Did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. Okay, folks can use the chat if they need to make comments. I heard a comment. I'd love to be interactive, and so please do hop in. So that's another thing that the sons of the prophets can do. Apparently, they can kind of move around, and that's a pretty good magic trick. So mastering the elements and moving fire around. This happens at a sacrificial occasion. Later on in the story with Elijah, with the prophets of Baal against the prophets of Hashem. And Elijah makes a fire come out of the sky. So that is kind of shamanic. And then all the way throughout in Kings, 2nd Kings, 1st Kings, you kind of have them being political advisors. They're part of a authority structure, right? So should the king go into battle? And of course, this was a time when there was, you could grow up to be a son of the prophet. You could go to the prophecy school. Men and women went. You could have a job in this period of being a dream interpreter. That was a common job, which is a job I would, be good at, I think. And it's kind of exciting, but it all has to do with sort of this exploration of sort of a intuition, if you want to say, or even, a real training in terms of entering into the school of the prophets and some of the things that they did and so forth. So here you have them having power as political advisors. And here is another thing. Elisha is the next generation of the dean of the prophecy school. He is initiated by Elijah. And so he comes up in 2nd Kings. And a lot of the stories about Elisha are simply repeating the Elijah stories. So he does it too. And this is a case where they are anointing kings over Israel. And that's been going on since Samuel, that the prophets have that job. So you can see where they're kind of political. Now this guy in 2nd Kings, when Elijah's about to die, that's a very beautiful story. You should look at that. Obviously they know what's going to happen. All the sons of the prophet know Elijah's going to die. How do they know that? He splits the sea. That's kind of cool. Walking on water, splitting the sea. I'm seeing a theme there. And the other thing, make a note, that Elijah and later on Jesus of Nazareth have in common. They don't die. They go up and they don't die. And it's really just, it's stunning to take this in, because it gives witness to, let's say, almost pretty much a millennium of a sort of a consistent training school and oracle school in the biblical Judaic Hebrew community that was basically a mystery school. And in one way, it gives a context for the founder of Christianity. And in another way, it's very shocking for both Jews and Christians both to see that we have a context for the student who later founded a different religion. But, it's the same school for us. It's the same prophecy school. Like we all have that same ladder that we're accessing. It kind of confirms something for us and gives a context for other religious leaders. I find that very interesting. So all the prophets know that Elijah's leaving, and there's this pass off of power from Elisha to Elijah. I'm sorry, the opposite, from Elijah to Elisha. And Elisha, in this paragraph, he passed a certain kind of test that Elisha was able to stay centered enough to see when Elijah actually went up into the whirlwind, not dying. That's why we wait for him on Passover. And the others said, when he came back, the other students said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. So what happened to Elisha there was visible to them, and they accepted his authority, which is pretty cool. And then here's one of the other miracle stories, which is really wonderful. Again, he allies with women. This is Elisha, the next generation. He causes fertility. He raises from the dead. that story is kind of repeated. Yeah. And again, in 2 Kings 4:1, this happened actually earlier too. There's this is another thing Jesus does later, which is continuous food from origin, a single origin. Also, again, aligning with women. It's a bit of just the key here is the prophecy school moves around. It was in Carmel, it was in Judea, now it's going over into the Jordan. And here later they play a role of political advisors and really in the late parts of Torah. What do you say about that, people? Prophecy school. I'm going to stop the share for now and see if we can tune in a little bit. Do people have comments or thoughts? I'm going to open this chat and see what it says there. Do I think that the writers of the New Testament actually originally meant for Jesus to be a prophet, and then somehow he ended up morphing into the Christian tradition? Yes. I mean, briefly. Very interesting. Isn't it interesting for Christians to take in? What would it mean to Christianity to take in that Jesus was a student in a sort of esoteric tradition throughout the Middle East? Maybe not quite as unique. I'm not the judge of that, of his role and mission and success in that mission, whatever that means. But I think that this is my thing. I'll tell you my answer to this. It's short. The difference between Judaism and Christianity is not who we think the Messiah is. It is what we think the Messiah is. So we have this kind of idea in Judaism that the Messiah just means the anointed one, the one with oil on their head. That's the one that's been discerned to be the leader. And so that there's going to be a time when someone actually related to David will be sort of a legitimate and just king and acknowledged king over Israel and the Hebrew community, et cetera, et cetera. And that, in essence, the Chiddush of Christianity, in a way, was to sort of say, it's just a completely different idea. It's more of a Greco-Roman idea, actually, of a God who dies and returns and can, in his personage, be like the end and the remaker of history, like a whole octave of development for humanity in a certain way. And so it's more of I think that's more of a Greco-Roman idea that it's going to be a history changer rather than a kind of a fulfiller of a relative of David and just governance and stuff like that. So yeah, I think those ideas really got conflated. And I like this idea actually in a way that lets me honor my brother and fellow student Jesus and my Christian friends, and maybe is just gives a First Testament. And notice I don't use Old Testament, I use First Testament. Give a First Testament context to Jesus. I think it's actually really a shocking idea to Jews and Christians, to be honest. So again, I'm open to your responses and thoughts about this.
I think that one of the things that a lot of Jews may or may not know, I was raised as Catholic and converted as an adult, but was the Christian perception of Jesus is not necessarily that Jesus started his church. It was the people who came after he did, who insisted that he had been the Messiah. Paul was the one who really, and he came out of the Greco-Roman period, as you said, but he was the one that really started the whole churchness, as opposed to just following in the path of those who had come before.
I agree. That is another contextualization of the beginning of that process. On your question of if he's the Messiah, would you say that's the more of the oily-haired, anointed, legitimate king related to King David, or more like the world changer, sine qua non, like unique phenomena playing this kind of eternal role in history? That's part of the distinction too. So anyway, I do want to give a little thought to how the prophecy school comes down to us in sort of a practical way. But I don't want to stop other questions and responses. So you ready? All right, I'm gonna give over some Reb Kalanimus. I tried to gather some of the sources today, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I've read him over many, many years. Reb Kalanimus Kalman Shapira, the Piazetzner Rebbe, also known as Rebbe the Warsaw Ghetto, Zichrono Yagen Aleinu. And so he really speaks of this very frequently, and it's an important and central concept to him. And you'll see that it really is in most of Hasidic thought and thinking, so that the seeking schools of Judaism have this idea also of Bnei HaNevi'im, and they speak about it kind of openly as a sort of ladder of inner development, if you want to say. So Rebbe Kalanimus, just I'm going to tell you a joke that he says. He says something like, you know, don't think this old guy is telling you that all of you are suddenly going to be like Isaiah. Don't think I'm saying that, he says. And then he goes, but look, let's be honest. Ezekiel was no Isaiah. The prophet Ezekiel was on a lower level than Isaiah. How could we even say we're Isaiah? Come on, you guys. But then he would say, and this is the last part of, he says, you're on the same ladder. You're on the same ladder. If you're seeking, you're on the same ladder. And how do you seek, he says, is you notice how you feel. Because the feeling is the conscience and the consciousness and the feedback system trying to tell you, oh, you're anxious now. Oh, you feel elevated now. You have to sort of follow the feeling, because that's, he says something like, the scratching of the soul. And he says, usually what we do around that, and it's almost literal, it's like when I read him, I feel it's very colloquial in a way. He says something like, we turn up the volume and go get a beer. When the neshama starts to say to us, it's out of integrity right here, there's something you should say, there's something you have to look at. When the neshama is trying to vibrate you to a more sensitivity to the Eibishter, to the root of your soul, we just cover it up. Or we make time for it, and we go into the well of it, the deep feeling of it, and we find maybe a nigun or a kavanah or something like that that makes it feel different inside of us. It makes the alchemy of it change. And then we're the students of our alchemy. We're the students of our deep wells of what we need to explore and what medicine we need to take. And our medicine is, in his words, sacred phrases and songs that we can sing for ourselves and so on. Isn't that really beautiful? It's really helpful and practical at the same time, right? I'll say one or two other things about that. He says, this is very sweet also. He says, in the situation that we're at right now, we probably, none of us could raise the dead, although we might be able to raise people's spirits and whatnot. But we probably couldn't walk on water or split seas or cause diseases or make bears come out and eat our enemies and stuff like that. But we're the Ruach HaKodesh, we're the same spirit, and the sense of being on the ladder of the Bnei HaNevi'im, where that is available to us. Very sweet what he says here. When we listen to each other with sincerity and humility and try to just reflect back the best sort of heartfelt advice, heartfelt companioning, that we can reflect back to the other, that the Ruach HaKodesh can really enter us when we're being in that, what other teachers have called that Mishkan, where the two hearts are meeting. And both are humble and both are open and both are looking for guiding spirit, just as you would do in a spiritual direction practice, or, you know, many of the listening practices that, in fact, Reb Kalanimus did teach us a kind of chevruta of a listening practice. That's just like that, just simply listening to the other, helping them find the root, asking them honest, open-hearted, maybe probing questions, loving questions, and just helping each other that way. So joining in community in different contexts is part of the tools that helps us. And that's part of the vessel that we have that brings in Ruach HaKodesh, that brings in vibrations from the higher worlds, from the worlds of the prophecy school. Questions, comments, and thoughts? I could say a little more. There's a meditation that Kalanam has taught, or are people familiar with that? That would be worth doing. There's also a Nigun that he taught. Nigunim are a little bit more limited on Zoom. You can hear them, but we can't all do it together. Maybe I'll share this for the final few moments, which would be a written piece. And I think, again, I have to share screen. Okay. Are you guys seeing that? Are you seeing the technique of quieting? Yeah, here. Okay. Okay, so people should be able to see that now. Is that correct? Sada Dishmaya, we learned from this. Isn't this sweet? We'll start with our Holy Master. This is a teaching situation of a student of Reb Kalanimus who survived the war. And you'll see here when you read it for yourself, I'll send you the link if you write to me, that how humble this man is when he speaks about how he came to be with the Holy Master, Reb Kalanimus. And Kalanimus taught that a dream is a 60th of prophecy, that the dream state is similar to prophecy, because when we sleep, our mind and our thoughts are quiet. We don't have we don't have ego as much in sleep. And so there's something that makes the mind more open, and it's an element of prophecy. Whereas in learning Torah, I learn, I think, there's more self, there's more ego, there's more insistence in a certain way. Look at this. Our goal is to come to a sleeping consciousness while we are awake. We wish to quiet the flow of thoughts. Isn't this beautiful? And look at this. If we could observe the stream of our thoughts for one day, it would seem that we were just like madmen. And this watching is very, very helpful to stem the flow of associative thoughts. And that leaves the mind quieter for higher influences. And that's how we move into the prophecy school. And then he gives information later about expanding and then integrating, and expanding and then integrating. And that's an ongoing process. He has other teachings about other levels and what to watch for and so forth. But in this very beginning, he says, just watch a clock, quiet your mind, slow yourself. You can read this for yourself. I'll be happy to send it to you. But I just want to emphasize here that they couldn't really grasp the full intent of the beginning, but how much he encouraged us most insistently to embark on this exercise of quieting the mind. And when we do quiet, and this is something of a chiddush, I think, with Reb Kalanimus, that he likes to put in there the idea that you'll put a verse in there. This is where you insert your alchemy and your medicine, like your favorite verse. And he recommends one that's a nigun. I could send you the source for the nigun. Again, if you write for me, it's something you could learn on the internet. It's posted up there. I'll sing it one time, and then it'll be time for us to finish. And I think I can share that with you. Let's see. I want to stop share. A new share. we'll just go over about 1 or 2 minutes here. And this was Reb Kalanimus's nigun that he taught as kind of an all-purpose one before you discern your own medicine. It goes like this. Oreini Hashem darkecha ahalech amitecha yochen levavi lira shemecha. So there's our half hour in the MOSh Pit. Shabbos to everyone. That's how we end. That's it. Masalam, everyone. Go in peace.
Would you repeat your address again?
Rabbi at Temple Israel Greenfield.org.